Hi, I'm Annie, and this is my CS61B Project Zero Gold Points video for my N-Body Extreme virus contact tracing simulation. So first, I'll give an overview of the project, and then I'll jump into a quick demo. Then I'll dive into how it works and some of my takeaways from the simulation. There are 4 types of bodies for each possible condition, as indicated by these different colors. So white is healthy but susceptible to infection. Orange is asymptomatic, so recently infected but not yet showing symptoms, but still able to transmit to others. And for reference, they only show as orange for clarity in the easy version of the game. In other modes, asymptomatic carriers will look exactly the same as the healthy bodies. And the incubation period is set to about 2 to 8 days before symptoms start showing. And then we have purple, which is symptomatic. So it has been infected for a period of time and is also able to transmit to others. And then finally, green means recovered. So the bodies become recovered after around 12 to 15 days after the initial contact. And for reference, these numbers are not exactly realistic with COVID, but I'll get more into that later. Overall, the objective is to contain the virus. So there are 2 ways to win. One is everybody is either healthy or recovered, so pretty much eliminating the possibility of new infection, or you can go through 6 consecutive days with no new cases. So there will be a tally on the bottom left that will show how long the streak is. And then, of course, if everyone becomes infected, that is an instant lose. And then at that point, when the game is over, all of the asymptomatic carriers will actually be revealed. So the way that you attempt to contain the virus is by your power of forcing people into quarantine. So as the contact tracer, you can click a body to start quarantine. And once it's in quarantine, as indicated by the yellow circle and X, it essentially stops moving and others aren't able to get close to it. So it's no longer able to infect others. And bodies are automatically released from quarantine after either going from symptomatic to recovered. So pretty much like if it tests negative consistently for a few days, or if it goes through an incubation period of around 8 days without showing any symptoms. But if it does start showing symptoms, then it automatically starts quarantine again. Yeah, that's all you really need to know to get started. Next, I'll do a demo before I get into how it works. All right, so on the opening screen, we can see an overview of the instructions that I outlined earlier. And on the bottom, here's a table of stats that explains each different level. So in easy mode, it does show asymptomatic carriers in orange. And there are only 20 bodies to start, and then 10% start out infected, and then 90% are social distancing. So that's not too bad. And as you can see, it just gets harder and harder as the levels go up. So let's first go through easy. So I'll just hit the number 1 on the keyboard to get started, or to choose easy mode. And then I just press space to start. So I can take a look at this initial setup first. It's kind of like the initial positions frozen in time. I see that there's 1 symptomatic, 1 asymptomatic, and I can see them here. So just for strategy, I'll press space to start, and then the countdown will start, and then I'm just going to hover here to capture it while I can. Okay. Oh, that was fast. Okay, so all of these are already infected. Looks like we're good to go. There shouldn't be any other transmissions because these are all quarantined and should not be released until they test negative. So they become healthy with the green. So we win. No new infections for 6 days. So then I'll press R to select a level and play again. Okay, so this time I'll choose medium. This is a lot trickier because it doesn't show the asymptomatic carriers in orange. So I can see on the left here, there are 2 that are asymptomatic. I just have no idea where they are. So first I'll track down the symptomatic one. And I'll go. Okay. Then I'll try to find the ones that aren't social distancing. Okay. Looks like only 2 are healthy, based on the sidebar. Okay. I lost. Everyone has been infected. Yeah, that was really tricky to kind of see, to not be able to see which ones were asymptomatic. Although they show now because it's the end of the game. All right, so now I'm going to take a stab at the impossible mode. So 7 of the 40 are not social distancing, and only 4 are actually currently infected, 3 of which are symptomatic, or 3 of which are asymptomatic. So this will be tricky, kind of trying to track down the ones that aren't social distancing. Let's get started. Okay, it looks like there's only one healthy one left. Let's see if I can keep that one safe. Okay, it must be this one that's healthy. Now the purple ones are turning green as they recover. Okay, so after 23 days, we had no new infections for 6 days, and I saved 1, so that's not too good considering there were 40 and only 4 initially infected, but I'll take it. Great, so next I'll go into a little bit of how this works. So in the initial setup, first it generates a 3x3 coordinate grid for each cluster, and then another 3x3 grid within each cluster for the individual body positions. So it'll shuffle all these coordinates up, and then it assigns the bodies to the positions randomly. So this is to make sure that the bodies are initially infected are randomly spread out. And so each of these clusters kind of simulates a group of people that frequently kind of interact with each other while social distancing, like, for example, an extended family, housemates, or a group of close friends. So there are 3 modes, easy, medium, and impossible. They all have the same core setup. It's just they just differ in 3 variables. So the total number of bodies, the percent initially infected, and the percentage following social distancing. So each individual body, as you can see here, has like a personal move radius, which is a range in which it is able to move. And so the move radius does not show in the actual simulation. I just outlined it here so you can see. And so in easy mode, on the left, you can see that almost all of them are social distancing. So they all have this like default small move radius, except for this one here. So they mostly only interact within their clusters. As you can see, like the individual clusters like don't overlap. So with this setup, the move radii mostly don't overlap between clusters, so infections can usually stay contained within a cluster unless there's an outside body that isn't social distancing that brings it around. Also, like I mentioned earlier, asymptomatic carriers are shown in orange in easy mode. So in medium, you can see that they have these huge circles on the edge. So though everybody has an initial position within a cluster, there are a few bodies that are not social distancing. And so they're able to move across most of the canvas to infect and transmit between clusters. And in this impossible mode, this is set to about 70% following social distancing, compared to, I think, like 85% and 95%. So you can see many more have these huge circles, making it even harder to contain the virus with such free movement. So the actual interaction of the collisions is actually a perfectly elastic collision, and it's based on the conservation of momentum. So with each collision, it calculates the appropriate angle by which the body would rebound, and then reflects that in the new x and y velocities. You can see here as they bounce against each other, they kind of go in the opposite directions. And so these collisions happen between 2 bodies, also against the bounds of the move radii, which is again shown by this white circle for this demo, but not in the real game. And then also like the canvas walls, so the big square throughout the entire board. I did also want to mention a few disclaimers. I wanted to emphasize that this simulation is quite far from reality. It was created for the purpose of learning more about Java classes and object-oriented programming, and with that in mind, I made several very oversimplified assumptions that are definitely not backed by science. So first of all, in the simulation, nobody dies. And there's also a 100% transmission rate, so any collision results in transmission. And this is, of course, an oversimplification of reality. as so many other factors affect whether contact between two people will result in transmission, like whether facial coverings were worn, or if the interaction took place indoors versus outdoors, or like the age and health of the individuals, etc. Third, movement behavior also doesn't change after becoming symptomatic. So once the bodies go purple, the movement doesn't really slow down or change in any way, which I would hope people would not actually do in this current day. So this might mirror more of like the early days of COVID, where people might have continued to go about their day, even if they had cold or flu-like symptoms. But hopefully it wouldn't represent the current state, where most people know the symptoms to watch out for and would hopefully stay home and avoid contact with other people if they did become symptomatic. Also, anyone can be forced into quarantine. So the user of the simulation has this like almighty power to stop anyone in their tracks for 8 days, which of course is quite unrealistic, at least in the United States. And finally, this also assumes that the bodies are immune after contracting the virus and recovering. And though we'd like to hope that this is true and reinfection is impossible with COVID, more and more studies are now emerging that are proving this assumption wrong. I'm sure there were many more scientifically flawed elements in the simulation, but I think you get the point. Finally, why did I do this? What was the point? What does the simulation show? First of all, this was supposed to be a contact tracing simulation, but it really shows that contact tracing is really hard and not super effective, especially with asymptomatic carriers. So this simulation shows really how ineffective it is if each body solely relies on an external contact tracer to try to curb infections instead of individually taking action. It really requires individuals to take responsibility for their own actions and be diligent on things like alerting others if they've been in contact with that they've been in contact with, if they start having any symptoms, and that they should also start self-quarantining. On the right here, you can see that 100% are infected in only 5 days. And so it's just super hard to see with asymptomatic carriers. Like you can't even tell that so many of these are getting infected until the end when it shows. Yeah. And then finally, even despite all the unrealistic assumptions I mentioned earlier, it's so clear that social distancing is absolutely essential to containing the virus. So as you can see, the side effects side by side or the 95% social distancing versus 80%, not even a huge difference, but it really moves so much quicker in the 80% social distancing. So on the left, they barely spread outside of their like individual clusters. It's pretty easy to contain. It spreads pretty quickly within the clusters, but after that, it doesn't really get too far. Whereas on the right, it spreads so quickly and it's almost impossible to control. And so in like the same amount of time, so many more were infected. So the takeaway from this is that we all need to reflect on how we can minimize our personal radius of movement, since that is pretty much the simplest thing we can do to reduce risks to ourselves and others. That's all. Thank you for watching and stay safe.